Hello, gentlemen, and welcome to the Men Save Your Marriage show. My name is Terry. I'm your host. I did an autopsy on my failed marriage, and now I use the lessons that I learned to coach other men on how to save their marriage before it fails. I'm going to share with you the things I wish someone would have shared with me before my marriage failed. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hello, gentlemen. You heard the bell. That means welcome to the ring. My name is Terry, and I'm your host. And this is the Men Save Your Marriage show. And as you know, you're welcome to the ring because this is a fight. This could be the fight of your life to save your marriage. And if you're listening to this, I just want you to know that I'm praying for you and thinking about you today because each of us are probably in a fight, especially if you're listening to this, in a fight for your marriage. This is episode number 12, and this episode is all about, affects everybody. Do not tune this one out. I promise you, if you're human, this one affects you. Episode 12 is about dealing with the emotional baggage, yours and hers. And we're going to talk for just a few short minutes here about how you deal with that emotional baggage that comes really just by doing life. And the reason I say that it applies to everybody is because it doesn't really matter who you are. It doesn't matter what background you came from. It doesn't matter how old you were when you got married. Were you 18, young kids, or were you 28, 38, 48? It doesn't matter. If you're in a marriage, if you're human, you came with baggage. And so did she. So this one is important. They're all important, but this one is significant because there's nobody that escapes this one. There's nobody that this does not apply to. So we're going to talk about dealing with emotional baggage. Again, yours and hers. And I believe, as you know, I did an autopsy on my marriage, and I believe you have to begin at least to deal with yours before you are seasoned enough, prepared enough to deal with hers. Okay, so let's dig into this. Okay, so the synopsis for this, as you know, I always come with a little bit of a description or a synopsis, and then 3 points. That's kind of how I guide each show. And this is all about unresolved emotional baggage and how it can wreak havoc on your marriage. And this episode will help guide you through recognizing your own emotional baggage, and then even maybe provide some tips for helping you deal with hers, your spouse's emotional baggage, in a supportive and constructive way. That's critical as well. So let's dig into this. As you know, I like to keep these short. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time. I just want to start planting some seeds for things for you to think about. And if you're listening to this, obviously you're in a space where your marriage is probably not on the greatest of terms, which means right now you are probably compounding the emotional baggage, you and her both, that you already came with. Even if there's been baggage in your past that you've dealt with, maybe there's some you haven't dealt with, there's the compounded baggage from being in this relationship together. And if you're listening to this, again, the spark is probably that you're in a struggling or failing marriage. So now that emotional baggage is even being compounded more. So this really becomes a critical aspect of each of our lives, each of our relationships, and each of our marriages. So let's dig into this. Again, just 3 points on how you want to deal with this. And we're going to start with the first one. And I kind of want to guide you guys through maybe just a little bit about how you identify your own unresolved emotional issues. And of course, to begin, you're going to have to ask yourself some questions. What does it even look like? How do I recognize it? I mean, how do I recognize if I have unresolved emotional issues, right? Because you never know, or at least maybe you haven't done the work to begin to know or to understand how to even recognize them. So let me just give you a few tips and a few pointers, some things I've learned from myself. Do you have something, maybe a subject, maybe a topic, maybe an issue in your life that when it's brought up, when you think about it, whatever the case may be, there is a reaction from you and you don't really even sometimes understand your own reaction? Is there any one particular thing that just sets you off and makes you angry for no reason? Is there somebody or something that you resent in life? Maybe not your spouse, and I understand if you're in a hard time in your relationship, in your marriage, it can be easy to let resentment build up. But resentment can be a trigger, just like anger can be a trigger, right? Grief can be a trigger, right? And you can find these kind of loops in your life to where, and if you really start to understand this and think about this, you may look back and start thinking about you, because we're talking about you here, not her, just you. You may look back and start to find some things. Oh, every time that I am involved with this, or every time this comes up, or every time this happens, my response is anger, or my response is frustration, or a lack of patience, or is there something that can kind of put me in a loop of grief, and I just always seem to get whatever the case may be, because we've all had life happen to us, right? You know, I'll give you a perfect example for me. You know, when I get into the later part of May, I always find myself in a cycle of grief, and that's because more than 20 some years ago, my wife and I lost a daughter at birth, and it happened in late May. And so I know when I see the calendar, and I'm not even necessarily consciously thinking about it, but somewhere in my subconscious, as I'm ticking through the days and I check off what I did today on my calendar, and I start looking at tomorrow, and when I find I start creeping into the month of May, there's just this gloom that kind of settles over me. And it took me some time to realize, oh, I know what it is. I'm going back to that time, that season, all those years ago, and now I find myself in this loop of grief. And once I recognized it, then I began to figure out, okay, what can I do about it? Because while I want to remember her and I want to never forget, I also don't want to let it affect me for 2 or 3 days while I'm conducting business or living a life. So I want to think on it. I'm not forgetting anything, but I also don't need to find myself caught in a loop of grief, you know, that really weighs me down. And so I have figured out ways to take some time. First thing I do, especially when it comes to grief, is I just need to sit with it. That's no music, no light, just, you know, light, but just, you know, kind of in not a dark, but a darkened room. I have an office that has no windows in it, or I can black out the window that's in it, so I can make it dark and you know, just a very minimal light or a candle, and I can just sit with that grief. And sometimes I need to cry a little bit. Sometimes I need to be concerned and, you know, and think on things. But if I just sit with it, sometimes, you know, 15 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes, whatever it takes. But if I just sit with it and come face to face with it, it seems to me that I work my way through that grief session quicker. I don't forget her. I don't forget what happened, and I don't forget, you know, the details of it. And I still miss her, but I'm able to deal with it and pull myself through that. So these are just some of the things, I guess, the words that I want to finish this section up with, as you begin to try to figure out to identify your own resolved issues, is what are your triggers, right? That's a very common word that we throw around a lot today, but what are your triggers? What triggers you? What causes you to have just an explosion of anger or an explosion of frustration, whatever the case may be? Where is there a deep resentment in you towards something, towards an event, towards a person, whatever the case may be? This is how you begin to recognize your own unresolved emotional issues. And you're going to find, as you start to do this work, you may be tracing them all the way back to your childhood days. You may be tracing them back to your teenage years. You're just going to have to work through these on your, you know, for yourself, and begin to recognize, I'm a human. I come with baggage. That's okay. And I have my own emotional baggage, and what I need to do for my own good and for the betterment of myself, for my family, for whatever, you know, for life in general, is I need to figure out what those are. And then I need to begin to work through them so that I am, you know, a better person, so I'm a stronger person, so that I'm more in tune with who I am. Okay? So that's how you begin to identify your own emotional baggage. And then the second one is how you this is where you can begin to think about some strategies. And these are strategies you can apply to yourself. And then this is also how you can begin to maybe recognize some emotional baggage in your wife or in your spouse. And this is going to be very important, because once you really start to have an understanding of yourself, and once you begin to recognize, and then maybe once you use some of these strategies I'm getting ready to share with you, you may begin to exercise some of those demons, if you will, some of that baggage. And as you do, you're going to have to be, this is kind of a word of caution, because when you start looking from yourself towards her, and you start looking at your spouse thinking, does she have emotional triggers? Is there a way that I can help? You're going to want to be very quick to point those out to her. And the last thing you need to do is to start pointing out, especially if you're in a struggling marriage, to start pointing out what you recognize as potential emotional baggage and triggers for her. Now, I don't know her, so I can't advise on a very specific way, but I would suggest that once you start to recognize them, you're going to have to begin to figure out how you can approach it in such a way that she's not triggered, how you can maybe step in and help her embrace whatever it may be, because she's going to come to a place, if in time, if it's done right, she may come to a place to where she's going to have to figure out how to deal with her own emotional baggage. And so this is going to be critical. So here's a few strategies for helping you, and then when the time comes, helping her deal with her emotional baggage, right? The first one, this one is kind of a deep one. It's called shadow work. This is where you begin to work through some of those dark phases in your history. And this one very often is suggested and recommended to be done with a therapist. I would recommend that, in fact, because you're going to have to dig in and do some shadow work about the things that and one of the reasons I call it shadow work is because this is where maybe you've had a trauma, you've had something said you may not even recognize, and your subconscious has buried it. So you may understand as you begin to recognize this that you're finding yourself stepping into this grief loop or this anger loop or whatever the case may be, but you're not even sure why. And that may require some shadow work to start to uncover whatever your subconscious has kind of started to block away. So shadow work is one, but here's a few others, and these are something that you can begin to tackle or think about yourself. Meditation. Do you spend any time in meditation? I told you, when I find myself overcome with the grief, I just need to sit with it. Well, that's kind of what meditation is for me. I'm a man of faith, and so for me, that's some prayer. That is just sitting with the grief, allowing myself to feel the grief, and then kind of exercising that in my mind and in my heart, if you will. And that's sort of a meditation. Another one is breathing exercises. Do you have any practices for calming yourself? Do you have any practices for allowing your mind to settle and through breath work begin to exercise whatever's going on inside of you? Here's one that is very common. In fact, I've seen this myself before. I do, as I get older, I like to practice a little bit of yoga. I'm not anything, I mean, it's not pretty, don't get me wrong, but I do like to do some yoga because it goes well with some stretching, and it makes me feel better as I get older. You know, my joints stay limber and I can work and move and feel good. So I do some yoga. Well, having a conversation one day with my yoga instructor, she told me, she said, it is not uncommon, especially for new people coming into yoga. It is not uncommon for them to maybe one day during a class, during an exercise, to find their mind settled and find themselves in such a place where she said she's seen it many times where somebody will begin to cry. And what they've done is through yoga, they've kind of set themselves at ease and they've settled their mind and they've reached a place of calm, and suddenly something from their past has presented itself, and as they go through the motions with yoga, they're actually exercising through the grief, the anger, the frustration, whatever it was, and they have found an emotional outlet in tears sometimes, as they have a settled mind and work through their body in something as simple as yoga. So, shadow work, meditation, breathing exercise, yoga. just exercise in general. Are you exercising? This is a way where you can maybe start to settle your mind and find a resource in exercise where you can. This is a strategy to help deal with some of this emotional baggage. Do you sit in nature? I had a grandfather that, he used to tell me, I'll never forget, he'd say, Terry, he said, if a mud puddle stands long enough, there's going to be bluegill in it. And he believed that like it was religious. And so he was a big fisherman. And one of the things that to this day that I absolutely love, I got a simple little $25 fishing pole and that and a few crickets or a few worms. And whether I catch anything or not, sitting on the bank of a small lake not far from my home, and just casting a net, watching that little yellow or greenish colored bobber as sometimes it just sits there and rolls with the water as the wind pushes the water in the pond, or whether a fish grabs it and I watch it disappear. There is something so therapeutic about taking an hour or two or sometimes an afternoon and just sitting and watching that bobber in the water. I don't have to be casting for bass and working spinners or top baits or anything else. I can just put a worm and a weight at the end of a line on a hook and put a bobber a foot or two up, 3 feet up, whatever the case may be, and give it a toss and just watch the water move that little bobber around. And that cork, that bobber, as it bobs up and down, and I sit in the peace and the quiet and take in the day, and I sit in nature and I hear the birds and I can feel the breeze, and I find myself in a state to where it is so therapeutic for me. So don't be afraid to go out and cast a line and just sit in nature and take it in. Another one, very often a lot of people do, is they'll repeat affirmations to themselves. If they have figured out maybe what this stressor is, what this baggage is, what it is, and find affirmations that speak to that, they can begin to repeat this affirmation or these affirmations to themselves. I work with a gentleman, and he and his wife are working through some stuff, and he has some affirmations he keeps on a note in his phone. And when he finds himself in a place, a particular place, he knows he'll just go sit in the car for a few minutes, or if he's at work, he'll go out and sit in his car, or maybe take a walk in the sunlight, and then he pulls that up and he'll read them and he'll just repeat them to himself a time or two and work through that. And then the last one, very much like I do, as I was telling you earlier in my office, when I said I sit with it, and that is just sitting in silence. That's what that is. I'm sitting with my grief, or I'm sitting with my frustration, I'm sitting with my worry, whatever the case may be, whatever that trigger is, to sit with it. So these are just a few ways that you can begin to figure out how, find a strategy that works for you for dealing with your emotional baggage. And when the time is right and your wife needs to begin or she wants to work on hers, what's wrong with her walking in and seeing you sitting in an office that's, you've got the lights down or a candle lit and the lights off or whatever? What are you doing? Well, I just be honest with her and tell her, well, listen, so this and, this particular thing kind of for some reason triggers me. And I am figured out that if I just sit here in silence with this issue, it allows me some time for meditation and I can begin to work through this. This isn't something anybody's done to me. This isn't, no big deal. This is just me working through my own baggage. And when that opportunity presents itself now, maybe she's starting to think, how do I work through my baggage? What could I do? And how does that work? And what does that look like? So those are the first two. The first one, this is, how to identify your own unresolved issues, your own emotional baggage. And these are the strategies I just shared with you on how to potentially deal with your baggage. And then these are strategies I would suggest, in the strongest of terms, that you need to have implemented these yourself before you ever think of suggesting them to your wife when the time comes for her. Don't be trying to counsel her on something you haven't done. But if she's seen you going to the gym and exercising, if she's seen you, sitting in silence to sit with your grief or your anger or whatever the case may be, if she realizes that's something you're doing, then when or if and when you suggest it, then she can at least be reassured to know, well, he's doing it himself. I'm at least willing to give it a try. But if you haven't tried it, if you're not working through your own issues, then you have no no history, no gravitas to be suggesting to her how she could work through hers. And then finally, how do you support each other in healing and in growth? And how do you support her more specifically? How do you support her? 3 very quick things. First of all, when she's going through something, you need to be a mirror for her, not a healer. You cannot heal her. I don't care what she's going through, whatever her trigger is, whatever her baggage is, you cannot heal her. This is something just like you. She's going to have to do it on her own. She's going to have to sit with her grief. She's going to have to work through her anger. Whatever her trigger is and whatever her response is, you cannot heal her. I cannot say that enough times. You can't fix her. Okay? She's going to have to reach a place where she's ready to do that on her own. But you can be a mirror for her. In other words, you can maybe show her, oh, you're stepping into this anger. And even when the time is right, even ask. I notice that every time we talk about this, you get angry. I don't know why. I'm trying to understand it, and I just want to help. And you can begin to mirror, but you can't fix her. You cannot heal her. Don't ever think you can. And then the second thing you can do, obviously you're not going to heal her. That's first. You can just kind of be a mirror for her. But then next, watch for trigger loops. Okay? I'm using that word again, loops, because over time, as you grow with her, you're going to see loops. What is it? What is it that every time this comes up, she draws in, she slips into this loop of anger, of frustration, of resentment, of whatever the case may be. Watch for those, because if you watch for those and recognize, oh, she's angry again, or she's upset again, or she's stressed again, or whatever it is, what is it that's doing it? What did it this time? What did it last time? And now you can begin to compare notes for yourself on what it is that's sending her into this loop. And then you can maybe begin to be a mirror for that particular issue, which will allow her to find it and begin to work through it. So be a mirror, not a healer. Watch for trigger loops in her. And then you can begin to separate past shadows from present realities. Now, here's what I mean, and the best way to use this one is just an example. Let's say you have a new girlfriend or a new spouse, a new wife, and the honeymoon phase begins to end, and you've been married for a little while, a few months, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's a year, 2 years, whatever, and you notice maybe you get a promotion at work, and maybe things are starting to take off for you in life. Just think about your history with her, right? And then suddenly, there's some nights where you need to work a little longer. You need to stay a little late. And for some reason, you find her overreacting. You find her stressing out about you staying at work an extra half an hour, an extra hour. Well, that may not be a response to the present reality of you're picking up some extra work. That may be a past shadow from years before she met you, when somebody else was staying late for work and ultimately ended up betraying her. Now, I'm not suggesting that's everything. What I am telling you is that there are loops that we can get into. You can do it. She can do it. There are loops that you can get into to where the response, the trigger, the reaction has nothing to do with what's happening now. It's not a present reality loop. It's not a present reality trigger. It's not a present reality emotional baggage. It is a shadow from something that's happened long before. And we have to begin to understand. So when you see her stepping into one of those trigger loops, begin to ask yourself, and if you find yourself stepping into them, wait a minute, is this because of what's happening now? Or is something happening now triggered something, a dark thing, a shadow from my past? So these are just a few of the things, guys. This is critical stuff, because this is the kind of stuff that allows you to begin thinking about doing the emotional work on yourself, how to be there with your spouse to where you can really grow as an individual, and you can save the marriage, and you can save the relationship. And how powerful would it be if you can see her step into a trigger loop, and you have the confidence in yourself, and you have the strength within yourself, because you've been working on yourself to say, you know what? Hey, if you're I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. I will sit with you in this issue, and we'll work through it together. How powerful is that? So, guys, thanks for being here again today. This has been episode number 12, Dealing with Emotional Baggage, Yours and Hers. I thank you for being here. I'll ask you, please, if you have been listening and you've gotten this far into the series and you've gotten this far into episode number 12 of this show, please like and subscribe. Leave a 5-star rating. I don't want you to lie, but I'd love a 5-star rating from wherever you get your podcasts. I thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Gentlemen, have a great day.